Hello, this one is potentially going to be kind of choppy. I just finished The Idiot. I've been reading it over, God, a really long period of time. First of all, this is not my first attempt to read The Idiot. This is my third attempt. First time actually finishing it, third time's the charm, I guess. Um, and I started G like almost 6 months ago, um, and read it in bits and pieces. So this is my last of Dostoevsky's major works. I'm a big an absolute fiend for Dostoevsky, um, and this is the last of his major novels that I've read, and I have only a couple of the novellas left to go. I'll probably be reading those in the next little while. Um, but anyway, I feel like I just my first impression on finishing The Idiot is I feel like I just don't get it. Like, um, the other three of his major works are Crime and Punishment, The Possessed, and Brothers Karamazov. And upon finishing those, I feel like there was a sort of clear, unifying idea that can be assessed as itself. And there really kind of isn't one for The Idiot. Okay, so here's the plot. Okay, actually, here's some background that might help you understand The Idiot. The thing that everyone says about this book, The Idiot, is that the protagonist of the story is a young man who fully embodies Dostoevsky's ideal of Christian love, of the Christian lifestyle. And that character is identified by almost everyone in the novel as an idiot. Um, and the idea, at least so the traditional scholarship goes, is that Prince Mishkin, the protagonist of this novel, is meant to embody these Christian ideals and to sort of test them. Like that the novel is almost some sort of experiment that Dostoevsky is doing in his mind, where he exposes his highest ideal of Christian brotherly love to this morally corroding environment of his time, which is the like high society of the Russian nobility. It's a really interesting concept, and I really understand why people pitch the novel that way because that sure does sound really interesting, but I don't think it's quite accurate. Like I went into this novel expecting Mishkin to be kind of a Christ figure, and in some ways he is, and in some ways he isn't. I think that some of the things that Mishkin does are I think maybe this is like a minor point, but some of the things that Mishkin does really bother me under this framework because the core plot of the novel is a love triangle that Mishkin is at the center of, which is very unchrist-like behavior. And so at first, while I was reading the novel, I was just sort of trying to reconcile it with this idea, like maybe Dostoevsky is trying to introduce this completely novel environment that Christ never would have been in, and at least that we know. Maybe that gospel got removed. Um, but to introduce this completely novel situation and to sort of figure out what the sort of like Christ-like, what the proper Christian attitude is, and I don't know, that just became like increasingly difficult for me to buy as the novel went on because let's I'm sorry. I think maybe you can hear from the way that I'm talking about this that it's a little bit of a confusing novel. And the thing that's really strange is that there are, like, as a novel as a whole, it's very confusing. But individual passages are completely brilliant and really just are just amazing in their own. Like, one moment when it comes really late in the novel, like um, midway through part four out of four parts. Uh, one of the women that is interested in Prince Mishkin sends him a hedgehog, and there's a whole like chapter dedicated to um, the fallout of this like completely incomprehensible romantic gesture. You know, you're interested in someone, so you send them a hedgehog. It's just, it's honestly the kind, it's the kind of thing that is the mark of a genius. You know, it doesn't take no normal schmuck off the street can think of the hedgehog gambit. Um. Anyway, I guess maybe I should describe some of the characters. So you have Prince Mishkin, and the um structure of the novel is sort of like multiple love triangles occurring simultaneously. Um, Prince Mishkin, who is our alleged Christ figure and the protagonist of the novel, I feel like this is sort of a mainstay of Russian literature, is having like a freaky, weird little guy who's like probably spent time overseas, and Mishkin fits into that archetype quite nicely. He went overseas when he was young because he has epilepsy, and so he went to a clinic that deals in these things, which is part of why he has this reputation as an idiot. Like in some situations, his epileptic problems will put him in a state of mind where he's not reasonable, he's not, he can't be spoken to. In part one, he makes contact with some distant relatives of his. Um, you got to keep in mind that distant relative in a noble context can potentially mean very distant. Like these people are not necessarily actually related, which is a good thing to keep in mind going forward when he starts having romantic feelings for one of these people. Um, and basically, all of the characters are introduced in the book one, which is a little bit confusing. There's like kind of too many characters. It has the Russian novel problem of every character having like three different names that get used interchangeably. Um, but the Iponchin family it makes the acquaintance of our protagonist. They turn out to be quite nice, and the eldest daughter of the Iponchins is eventually sort of smitten with Mishkin. He comes in he comes in part one, and he it's actually like part one is so good. Like even if you don't intend to read this whole novel, like you should probably read part one because Mishkin just sort of shows up out of nowhere, and because of this very like disarming innocence that he has, everybody just sort of automatically likes him, even when they're like actively scheming against him. Um, yeah. So in part one, all of the characters are introduced. Um, The other important character is someone named Nastasia Filipovna, who is the main romantic interest. So Aglaya Ipanshin, the eldest daughter, I think her name is Aglaya, geez. The eldest Ipanshin daughter is interested in Mishkin. Mishkin is interested in this other woman named Nastasia Filipovna. And Nastasia Filipovna is probably one of the most interesting individual characters in Dostoevsky's corpus because Dostoevsky does not write women like he just doesn't focus on them very frequently. Not that his female characters are unbelievable or bad or something. They're just not really the focus of his work. Um, and Nastasia Filipovna is like the fucking black hole that all of these other characters orbit around. So it's an exception to the trend, which is really interesting. So Nastasia Filipovna is very intelligent. She considers herself to have been gravely wronged by this guy named Totsky, who I think basically adopted her. Like, there was some sort of family tragedy when she was really young, and he basically like adopted her as a like, oh, I'll take care of this girl. But then started having you know sex with her. Um, in modern times, we would call that rape. Um, uh, but the characters in the novel, and I can't really tell, but maybe the novel itself doesn't quite view things that way, um, which is odd. I don't quite know what to make of it. Like, this is such a complicated novel. There's just so much to like tease out about it. I was a little bit hesitant to even make this video because I don't think that I have any sort of like final conclusions. of all Dostoevsky novels I've read, it's the one that you could say the most about because it's dramatically uneven. Like Crime and Punishment is just good all the way through, but The Idiot is, as an artistic work, is messy and fucked up. And because it's this like literary experiment, Dostoevsky didn't even necessarily know what was going to happen as he was writing it. But anyway, so Nastasia Philippovna also has a trait that is very important, which is that she is the just the most beautiful woman ever. You know, everyone who sees her is like, "Whoa, that's Nastasia Philippovna." So everybody wants to be with her. There are three main characters who end up going after Nastasia Philippovna at one point. We have obviously Prince Mishkin, who is in love with her from the very moment that he sets eyes on her. And then we have this guy named Rogozhin, who we actually meet in part one. Rogozhin is a merchant. He is extremely wealthy, and he is extremely like goal oriented. He doesn't exactly, I would say, love Nastasia Philippovna, but he more just like wants to acquire her. And Nastasia Philippovna has this weird sort of like self respect thing where she almost like prefers to be pursued in that sort of way. Um, okay, and then there's this guy named Ganya who is relevant for the first part of the novel, but sort of becomes less relevant. Like he doesn't he becomes like not really a viable suitor to her pretty early on. In fact, it's the main drama of Arc One is that for complicated political scheming reasons, somebody wants Nastasia Filipovna to get married as soon as possible. Um, Actually, no, it's her. I remember what it is. It's her adoptive father wants her to get married as quickly as possible because once she's married, the risk that she will bring to light their, in his mind, affair um, decreases because it would bring like shame and dishonor onto her and her new husband. So he wants her to get married as quickly as possible so that he can sort of shut down the possibility that she will ruin his life over the, uh, child molestation that he's been doing. Um, and she kind of wants to ruin his life, but she sort of teeters back and forth on this. Um, it's an interesting question why she doesn't just come out with it. Um, but anyway, so he wants her to get married as quickly as possible, and he basically pays this guy Ganya to marry her. And Nastasia Filipovna basically just enjoys torturing this dude. She just, she does all sorts of horrible things to him that make it very clear that she sort of understands what the situation is, that he is marrying her only because he's getting paid off by her adoptive father. And they have this big ball, and at the ball, the prince announces at a massively inopportune moment that he absolutely would marry her and that he wouldn't hold her disreputable past against her or anything like that. And his love for her is like something really strange. I don't quite know how to describe it. It's very like he admires that she's been through everything that she's been through and that she made it through, in one piece. Like he doesn't really view her as like damaged in the way that everybody else in the novel does. He views her as resilient. And he makes a point of saying that he wouldn't hold any of her past against her. And for a while, it seems that they're going to do that. And then at the last moment, she sort of vacillates and she changes her opinion and she's like, I couldn't do that. That would be ridiculous. Anyway, I'm going to go with Rogozhin. Um, and for the whole fucking rest of the novel, she's vacillates like the the engine of the story is Nastasia Filipovna vacillating between Rogozhin and Mishkin. Um, and so we're obviously rooting for Mishkin because he's our protagonist and also he's like a good person rather than being Rogozhin. Um, And Nastasia Filipovna, I think, seems to understand that she would be miserable getting married to Rogozhin, but somehow that seems to sort of be what she wants anyway. Like, she almost feels that she doesn't really deserve to be respected in the way that the prince deserves, in the way that the prince respects her. It's quite an odd setup, but it sort of intuitively makes sense that someone could feel that they are not really deserving of full respect. Um, so she flips back and forth a whole bunch. Our Prince Mishkin inherits a bunch of money, um, which it's interesting because Mishkin never really like he's a very weird protagonist because even though he does want to get married to Nastasia Philippovna, he holds his all of his own desires sort of at arm's length. And so he's not really a very active protagonist. Like he doesn't really want anything in a way that he's willing to pursue it, if that makes sense. Like he wants these things and he's willing to take actions for them. But I get the sense that, if at any point during the plot of this book, Mishkin had just been told like you for some reason you have to move to Germany now. Like you're never going to see any of these people again. He wouldn't be too bothered by it. Which is a very strange way for a protagonist to be. I feel like you could rip him right out of the plot and it wouldn't do anything to him. Like there's nothing that he needs so bad that he needs to stay there, which is really weird. But Dostoevsky solves this one by giving him this sort of fatal attraction to this messed up woman. Um, she's sort of a femme fatale, but not really. I mean, I think that trope kind of sucks and it's quite problematic. But she definitely is a woman that you don't want to get involved with. But the thing is that it's sort of like a femme fatale in reverse type situation because the thing that she's gonna do that is so horrible is just like very publicly destroy herself. Like that's what everyone can see is going to happen. Um, there are some other characters introduced. There are some very long side plots. I do think there's one really interesting character who is a nihilist. It's very common for Dostoevsky to include young nihilist socialist types in his novels, egoists, whatever you want to call them. But what's weird is that this guy I think is the most sympathetic out of all of them because he has tuberculosis and he's at a very late stage, so he's going to die very soon. And so, in comparison to characters from other books like Raskolnikov from Crime and Punishment or Pyotr Stepanovich from The Possessed, I would say that this guy is a lot more sympathetic because he actually has like an understandable reason for believing all of these things. It's not just that he thought himself into a weird conclusion; it's that he was concretely put in the situation of having months, maybe weeks to live, and just thinking about that all day, every day has totally spoiled and ruined his mind and led him to these awful, weird places. Um, and he, along with Rogozhin and this old, like sort of, I get the sense like sort of demented general, all have this weird thing. There's a lot of like vacillating in this book. They all have this weird thing where they are sort of attracted to the protagonist, our Christ, our problematic Christ figure. They come to him, they bring up their problems, they have, strange confessions that they feel compelled to give. They make friends with him, and then all of a sudden they turn around and precisely because of how open and accepting he is, they feel this spiteful need to hate and destroy him. It's really quite something. That dynamic doesn't click with me like nearly as intuitively as Nastasia Filipovna's desire for her own harm. But it is an interesting dynamic. I think this theme of sort of like moral vacillation or double thoughts, double consciousness, whatever you would call it, is a significant theme in the novel. Anyway, another thing that ties Mishkin to the plot is all this fucking money that he inherits, right? It's a mo money, mo problems type of situation. Like he comes into the plot, and his biggest issue is that like it's weird because he comes into the plot and he has no money and he has lots of problems, but somehow acquiring money gives him just like infinitely more problems. Like he has a warm coat now, but he doesn't. But also there are all of these like people around him who he can't tell. And actually, it's not that he can't tell; it's that he has no discernment for these things whatsoever. He wouldn't even consider trying to tell the difference. between someone who's there just to take money from him and a friend. And the thing that's weird and like quite disturbing is that often the characters that come to him for money, they can't tell if they're there out of friendliness or out of this sort of predatory instinct. They can't tell either. Um, okay, so I'm gonna spoil the ending of the novel, which is that uh, the Ipanshin girl eventually decides that she wants to marry Mishkin. They get engaged, and then at the last minute, Nastasia Filipovna, for reasons that I think are like not really very well, I don't understand. I don't fully understand them. Um, she changes her mind and she says, "Oh, Mishkin, do you remember all those promises you made to me? I'll be your betrothed." And so he breaks off the engagement with Aglaya, ruins his relationship with that entire family, and gets betrothed to Nastasia Filipovna. And then, a few months later, when it's time for the marriage, she changes her mind again and she runs away from the wedding. Mishkin is not devastated by this. It seems to be something that he kind of expected. And there's another theme that I feel I'm sort of grasping at here is this almost like destiny thing because Mishkin clearly knows that this is what's going to happen. He clearly understands that his infatuation with this woman is bad for him, um, but he sort of goes along with it anyway, even though he knows this is likely exactly where it will take him. Um, she runs away with this Rogozhin character, and then Rogozhin, who has this like intense desire to sort of possess her fully, he murders her, and that's pretty much the end of the novel is the murder and the fallout of the murder. Prince Mishkin, our protagonist, he goes crazy, um, and needs to return to treatment in Switzerland. His treatment doesn't go well. At the end of the novel, it's not clear whether or not he's permanently insane, although it's leaning towards yes. Um, the eldest Epanchin girl meets with what for Dostoevsky I guess must have been a fate worse than death, which is that she marries a Pole and it's implied becomes a Catholic. um, Gotta love some of the opinions in these old timey novels, like oh no, a Catholic. That's basically that's the fast track to hell. Um, yeah, so it's sort of a tragic novel. Like it falls apart for just about everyone, and it falls apart. The weird thing is that the novel does manage to maintain the suspense, even though it falls apart for reasons that are like clear from the beginning. Like this ending is not that surprising, based on what we know about Nastasia Filipovna, based on what Mishkin's professed commitments, we can sort of see a lot of this coming. Um, even the murder with even Nastasia Filipovna's murder is foreshadowed like very well. So anyway, that's the plot of the novel, and I'm really having trouble knowing what to make of this because, first of all, I mentioned that scholars have traditionally understood Mishkin as the highest embodiment of Dostoevsky's Christian ideal, but I really don't think that's. I just have this strong suspicion that that's not quite accurate. Um, I don't know. There's something about him that just feels too human. Like he is fallible. He definitely goes too far in some things. He's really not Christ-like in a lot of ways, and he also does not seem to embody. Um, he doesn't really seem to embody in many ways an ideal that can actually be followed, if that makes sense. Like a lot of the things that are special about Mishkin is that he has this like almost supernatural ability to read people, but only in the context of knowing um, like good things about them, I guess. Like he has a supernatural ability to read people, but he doesn't ever make like bad conclusions about people, even when he can see very clearly the bad things that they're going to do. Like he tells Rogozhin well ahead of him committing the murder that if he were ever to marry Nastasia Filipovna, he thinks that Mishkin thinks that he would Rogozhin would murder her, which is of course exactly what happens. Um, so even when he knows all these terrible things about people, He doesn't come to negative conclusions. Um, yeah, if I were, there's just so much to tease apart about this book. I think it's, as far as it goes, a almost incoherent masterpiece, and there are individual bits that are just so incredible. Like, um, it's one of Dostoevsky's most personal novels. He had epilepsy, so a lot of the stuff about Mishkin's epilepsy is taken directly from his life. He also put in there, Dostoevsky faced a mock execution. He puts in there a whole bunch of stuff about mock executions. He has like almost a whole like essay about it, which is really interesting. I also think the other thing is, in terms of like thinking of this novel just as a I'm not actually decided on it, but thinking of it in terms of like a creative failure, it's interesting because I have read a lot of the other Dostoevsky novels, and I've joked with my friends sometimes that you can sort of graph Dostoevsky novels where like one axis is the number of marriages in the book, and the other axis is the number of murders in the book, and that this in that schema, this novel would be Dostoevsky maxing out on marriages. It's a very marriage oriented book. There are plenty of marriages in the book, and there's only one murder. There are other murders that are alluded to. There's an attempted murder, but hey, attempted doesn't count. Um, and honestly, I feel that over orientation towards marriage is sort of a problem for him. Like he sort of inverts the inverts the vibes of Crime and Punishment. Crime and Punishment is a book about a murder and the things that flow forth from that murder, and the garnish on top of that story is this marriage drama that becomes very, very important and eventually becomes interwoven with the murder story. Whereas here you have sort of the opposite, where the marriage is the focus, and then all of this sort of like crime and like scheming becomes a subplot that interweaves with the marriage stuff. And I feel like the reverse is just not quite as good. Um, yeah, I really wish I could drive forward to some grand conclusion, but there it is, The Idiot. It's the most incoherent masterpiece I've ever read.